we'll go and get started. Heck, we'll go start right now. All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining Datacon LA 2021. My name is Corey Fowler. I'll be your host today, and I'll be co-hosting along with Stephen Kwok. We'll be moderating the chat and Q&A during this session. Today we have our guest, Brian Blackwell, and he'll be talking about his today on operationalizing predictive analytics prevention in Los Angeles. Guess you guys were hearing earlier. He is, of course, a senior data scientist at the California Policy Lab at UCLA. He specializes in homelessness project portfolio, leading projects ranging from predictive analytics implementations to causal inference and program evaluation. In his spare time, he wants to and play.
Great, thank you so much. You were coming through a little bit softly there for me, so hopefully I'm coming through okay for everyone. Just give me a shout out if there's any kind of connectivity issues. Great, so thank you so much. I want to start by saying a quick thank you to the organizers of Datacon LA. I've really been tremendously impressed by the presentations that I've seen so far, and I really value the opportunity to share some of our work with such a knowledgeable and enthusiastic audience. I realized after submitting this talk to Datacon that I could have given it a somewhat snappier title. So what I'm going to be talking about today is predicting and preventing homelessness in Los Angeles. More specifically, I'm going to be talking about a homeless prevention unit pilot program that's just been launched by LA County in partnership with us at the California Policy Lab, where we're leveraging predictive analytics to try to prevent homelessness before it happens. Let me start by telling you a little bit about the California Policy Lab. We're a nonpartisan research institute based at the University of California, and we have 2 sites at UCLA and UC Berkeley. And our mission, broadly speaking, is to improve the lives of Californians by generating evidence that transforms public policy. And we do this by forming lasting partnerships with government agencies in order to harness the power of administrative data. I've been working at CPL for just over 3 years now. I focus pretty much exclusively on our homelessness projects, but we also work in 5 other policy areas of labor and employment, social safety net, criminal justice, education, and we're also starting to expand into health. I mentioned that we aim to form lasting partnerships with government agencies. I want to just elaborate on that a little bit. Often when a government agency supplies data to a typical academic researcher from a university, it tends to be this kind of short-lived relationship that concludes when the researcher has published the paper. And the partnership doesn't always create lasting value for the agency. With CPL's model, our staff is almost exclusively full-time, and we're focused on really creating data and legal and research infrastructure that serves as a foundation for these long-term program implementations and research partnerships. And the Homeless Prevention Unit that I'll be talking about is a great example of the kind of complex multi-year project that's enabled by this model. So we can frame today's discussion in terms of a very broad research question. Can we prevent homelessness before it happens? So because this is a very big topic, I want to break it down into a couple of smaller kind of related questions. So firstly, because prevention is about identifying people who are currently stably housed but at risk of falling into homelessness, how do we go about identifying people who are at highest risk? And secondly, because prevention involves spending scarce money and resources on people who are not currently homeless, we really want to know whether those resources are having an impact in terms of reducing inflows into homelessness. So the LA County Homeless Prevention Unit pilot program is really addressing these 2 questions. So firstly, we're identifying high-risk individuals through what I think is a fairly novel application of predictive analytics using proactive outreach to a high-risk list that's identified by the models. And we're going to try to answer this kind of causal impact question through a rigorous randomized evaluation. So today we're really going to be talking about some of the challenges and opportunities that come with trying to operationalize predictive analytics like on the ground for vulnerable and marginalized populations. So let me talk a little bit about the homelessness policy context in Los Angeles and a little bit of background on homelessness prevention. If you happen to live in Los Angeles or you follow the news coming out of LA, I'm sure you're aware of the fact that we're facing this enormous humanitarian crisis of homelessness. According to the latest point-in-time count, about 66,000 people experience homelessness in any given night in LA County. There are lots of complex historical reasons for this. They're the subject of many books, PhD dissertations, academic articles. I'm not going to discuss these in great detail today, but the bottom line is that it has to do with a severe housing shortage in Southern California, along with stagnant and declining income. What makes this policy space particularly challenging is that in Southern California, we have these extremely restrictive zoning policies that just make it very politically and logistically challenging to build affordable housing. So this, I think, has really led policymakers in LA to pursue a range of strategies for dealing with this crisis.
Oh, pardon me, Brian, but
yeah.
Somebody is noting that your screen share is frozen at the first slide.
At the first slide.
Yes.
And you see, are you all seeing homelessness in LA County?
Yes, we are.
Okay. I'm going to keep doing it this way and see.
Okay, great.
See if that helps. Okay, so the scale of the homelessness crisis is intensified focus on prevention as a strategy. So prevention is an intervention for people who are currently stably housed but at high risk of falling into homelessness. And it typically consists of a package of services such as case management, short-term financial assistance, legal assistance, and other services. There is some quantitative evidence out there on homelessness prevention. It's somewhat limited. It suggests that prevention is effective at reducing inflows into homelessness, but that the targeting piece is difficult. So a paper that's often cited studied a kind of a natural experiment in Chicago with a prevention hotline. So it was a natural experiment because if you called on some days, the funds would be available and you would get financial assistance. If you called on other days, you wouldn't necessarily get anything. So they found that it reduced the likelihood of entry into a homeless shelter within 3 months by about 88%. But it was from a very low baseline. So those people who didn't get financial assistance, only 1.6% of them entered a homeless shelter. So that suggests that finding a high-risk population is challenging. Are we all seeing a Venn diagram here?
Yes, we are.
Yes.
Great. Okay. 18 months into this virtual stuff, it doesn't get any easier. Okay, so there are existing homeless prevention services in LA County. So Measure H tax dollars, so that was a sales tax increase that passed about 5 years ago. They fund prevention services that serve approximately 3,000 households each year. So the critical thing about these existing services is that they rely on participants to self-identify as being at risk and to present to providers for services. And this is a little bit problematic for a couple of reasons. These services are not necessarily all that well advertised, so people don't necessarily know that they're available. And also with vulnerable and marginalized populations, there might be understandable reasons why they're distrustful of the existing systems and don't necessarily want to self-identify for services. We did an interesting exercise at the outset of this project where we looked at people who are receiving existing Measure H prevention, and we compared those people with people that were predicted to be at risk by our predictive models. And we found that there was almost no overlap between these two populations. What this suggests is that there's potentially a very large pool of people out there who are at high risk of falling into homelessness but are not being connected to existing systems. So that was really the motivation for this whole project. This question of how do we reach these high risk populations who don't necessarily self-identify. Okay, so let me start talking about the Homeless Prevention Unit pilot program. So this is a pilot program that's been in the works for about 3 years now, pretty much for the whole time that I've been at CPL. And it was approved by the LA County Board of Supervisors in 2020. It's a pilot program for single adults. And it's a partnership between CPL, the Department of Health Services, the Housing for Health Division, the Department of Mental Health, and the LA County Chief Information Office, who is supplying the data. The basic idea is that we use predictive models that are designed and built by us at CPL to create what we call risk lists of recent DHS and DMH participants, people who have recently used DHS and DMH services, who are at high risk of homelessness. We pass those risk lists on to the HBU team of case managers and caseworkers, and they reach out to these people, literally calling them on the phone and determining their needs. And then they serve them with services that include flexible cash assistance, support with connections to services, and other benefits. So this is really a kind of a golden opportunity to get some kind of rigorous quantitative evidence on the effectiveness of prevention as an intervention. So we're going to be doing a randomized evaluation here. So the basic idea is that the risk list is randomly selected from the high risk pool. And then we're going to use differences in outcomes in linked administrative data in order to determine effectiveness across various comparison groups. So we've been underway since the start of this year, and there are a few different phases of the pilot. So in phase one, which took place in the first half of this year, the goal was to finalize intended program participants. And really what we were trying to do here is learn as much about the data sources that were available to us and those that were unavailable to us, and figure out how they could be used to identify people who are currently stably housed and eligible and suitable for a prevention intervention. Since June, we've been doing a small-scale program launch, and we expect that this phase is going to last until December of this year. So we've actually been reaching out to real people and offering prevention services. And the goals here have really been to kind of practice, develop, and refine operational workflows for performing outreach and providing services. So figuring out just on the ground, how do caseworkers actually go about this, because it is somewhat different from the way that services are typically delivered in the homeless services system. Phase 3 is going to be a full program launch. We're anticipating that this is going to happen in January of next year. And we're hopeful that there's going to be a significant expansion so that we can offer services to a wider pool of participants. And this is the point at which we're going to press the play button on the causal randomized trial in order to estimate causal impacts. Okay, so let me talk a little bit about some of the things that we discovered in phase 1 of this project. So, as I mentioned, the goal was to finalize the intended program participants and really learn about our data sources. So our predictive models are trained on de-identified data that we receive from the Los Angeles County CIO. So the CIO maintains an integrated data system, a data warehouse that integrates data from 9 LA County agencies. So they get data from the health services system. This is going to be from county administered hospitals and clinics. They get data from the mental health services system, justice, so probation and the sheriff department, benefits administration, so things like food stamps, family welfare programs. So we use that de-identified data to build and train predictive models. And we use those models to generate risk lists that we send to the Homeless Prevention Unit team of case managers and caseworkers. At the outset of this project, we realized that the data that's in the InfoHub data warehouse, there's a lot of data in it, a lot of informational individuals and a lot of data elements, but we understood that it's not exhaustive of all of the data that's available in the internal data systems of the agencies that are supplying data. So we built into our project plan this phase of what we call a manual data lookup. So we would produce risk lists and pass them on to HPU staff, and they would actually manually go into internal systems and look up people and try and fill in some of the gaps in our understanding of of these participants and their needs. So one of the things that we discovered through this process is that a lot of critical data for determining eligibility and housing status is kind of locked away in these internal agency data systems and is unavailable to the research team. So we found a lot of critical data that is in address fields, for example, a lot of data that's in free text case notes. In a lot of cases, it wasn't even in kind of text case notes, it was in scanned police, handwritten like police reports and things like that. So this has been a significant data challenge. It is a really interesting discovery. I think that has a lot of implications for homeless research in Los Angeles. We're discovering a lot of additional sources of information about homelessness that are really not available to researchers currently. So really the solution here is that we're kind of building in this manual data lookup, leveraging staff knowledge and expertise, and we're kind of building that into the operational workflows for the program. It's just one of those things where there's not really any way around that. So as part of that manual data lookup process, that was something that enabled us to refine our eligibility rules. And because we were refining some of these rules, it was changing the target population, so that correspondingly changed our model evaluation results. So at the outset of the project, we had certain hypotheses about how we could identify stably housed people in the data. And when running the models on that target population, about 140,000 eligible people per year, we produced pretty strong results. Our area under the receiver operating curve, was pretty strong at 0.895. Now, when we went through this lookup process of refining those eligibility rules and refining that target population, it kind of reveals that maybe those initial results were slightly illusory, because you're just including a lot of people in that sample who are already literally homeless and not necessarily eligible for HPU services. So at the end of this process, we came up with about 10 additional filter rules around housing status and county service contact. And we took a little bit of a hit in our model accuracy. Our area under the receiver operating curve goes down to 0.823. So it's still pretty strong, but it kind of illustrates that when you actually go about implementing these kind of models on the ground, things can look somewhat different from how you originally anticipated.
Excuse me, Brian, we have a request from the audience to show your slides in presentation mode so that they're more easily viewable, if possible.
Yes, sure. I think there's a tendency for them to get frozen.
Okay.
If I do that. Are we seeing HPU participant profile here?
Yes, the slides are visible. They're just not full screen. I think that's...
Okay. Is it full screen now? It's in presentation mode.
It is not full screen.
Okay.
So.
Okay, well, I'm not sure what else I can do here. I might just have to kind of press on.
No worries.
Great, thanks. Yeah, thanks everyone for bearing with me. Okay, so HPU participants. So let's talk a little bit about the people that we've served so far in the program. So HPU participants are just generally much higher acuity than those who are being served by existing LA County homeless prevention programs. So about 80% of program participants are people of color. If we compare them with those who are being served by current prevention programs, They're much more likely to have prior visits to the emergency room. They're much more likely to have prior mental health crisis stabilization episodes. They're much more likely to have a record of an arrest for a felony. So I think this suggests that we are reaching a vulnerable population that has high needs, but it does make kind of care coordination challenging. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how we're actually doing the outreach and the prevention services. So it's pretty simple, really. Once we supply the risk lists, HPU staff literally just go down the list and call participants, right? And they have kind of a loose script, but they try to vary it in order not to sound too robotic. And the aim is to have a conversation to determine housing status and participant needs, because we don't necessarily know from the data exactly what it is that people are going to be needing. That conversation is quite important. And there's a range of services that can potentially be offered. So case management is kind of offered to everyone. It could be short-term financial assistance. So this could be things like security deposits, rental assistance, utilities, transportation, and also support with connection to other services is kind of important. All right, are we all seeing HPU participants, the story so far?
I'm afraid not. I think it is frozen again.
Okay, it is that issue. Okay, I'm afraid I'm going to have to keep it in this mode. There's something about the full screen mode which is broken.
All right.
Okay, great. So here's how we've been doing so far. So since June 2021, we've attempted to contact about 400 people on the risk list. About 45 participants have been enrolled so far. In terms of feedback from staff and participants, we've had generally really positive responses to outreach. We do seem to be finding people who are on the verge of losing their housing. So it seems like we're getting the timing piece right. We're utilizing a range of financial assistance options, things like gift cards, relocation expenses. We're discovering that there are many participants with a history of serious mental illness who are heavily reliant on family support. And without that family support, they would be falling into unsheltered homelessness, it seems. Establishing contact with vulnerable populations can be challenging. So we're finding a lot of disconnected phones, a lot of people who are understandably skeptical about cold calls. And also, we're just finding that connections to outside services are going to be critical because of the long-term needs of participants. So the key point here is that HPU participants have high needs, and we do feel like this is a population that really needs to be connected to services. But these are the people who are unlikely to self-identify or self-refer. Okay, so I'm going to say a little bit about how we're going to try and estimate impacts through randomized evaluation. So one of the research questions that I talked about at the outset is prevention effective at reducing homelessness? And it's really randomized controlled trials that are the gold standard for answering this kind of causal impact questions. That's why we put COVID vaccines through a randomized controlled trial. It's why we do A/B tests in the tech world. It's really the best way of answering that kind of question. So randomization at the point of service contact is often hard to implement in public policy settings. So for kind of ethical and other reasons, people who run and administer services in a government agency setting are understandably nervous about doing things like withholding treatment from a control group, right? So it's hard to do these randomized trials in a public policy setting. The HBU evaluation with the particular research design that we have, we actually avoid a lot of these issues by randomizing the risk lists before proactive outreach and service contact. So randomization into treatment and control, isn't happening after people have been contacted for services. It's happening before. So it kind of sidesteps a lot of these issues that policymakers often have. So there's a challenge here with the research design in that, some participants in the treatment group are going to be uncontactable, or they're going to decline services after outreach. So in the literature, this is known as the problem of non-compliance in randomized controlled trials. And the challenge here is that because we're not reaching out to the control group, we don't have that same information for the control. So we actually have to keep the uncontactable or declined participants in the study, despite the fact that they're not receiving services. So this effectively reduces the treatment effect and dilutes the treatment effect and reduces our chance of detecting impacts, because necessarily we have a lot of people in the treatment group who aren't receiving anything. So there are some solutions that we can apply to kind of get around this. So there are statistical methods. There's something called a bloom adjustment that we can use in order to adjust for that, that yellow group in this diagram. And the other thing that we're looking into is to conduct mini RCTs or A/B tests on different outreach strategies and see if we can do things that will increase uptake and contactability. So trying different things like text messages, giving people incentives such as gift cards, trying to do some in-person contact, so actually driving out to meet people rather than just contacting them on the phone. All right, so that's pretty much all the material I had. So in summary, I think this is a really exciting and kind of novel strategy that we're pursuing here. We're going to have to see if it's going to work. There's a lot of kind of technical, operational, logistical challenges here, but we're trying to work through them. So preventing homelessness, is an urgent policy problem. It has to be part of our policy toolkit, right? Because so many of the other options are just so difficult logistically and politically. Now, homelessness is a humanitarian crisis. It's a major humanitarian crisis, but it's also statistically a somewhat rare event. So deciding who should get prioritized for scarce prevention resources is challenging. So we think that this is actually a great use case for predictive models, and we've been able to develop predictive models that are precise enough, we think, to be usable in a real world context. So over the last year, we've been tackling the challenges of moving those models from theory to the real world. And once you start doing that, you really start to uncover a lot of these challenging data issues, challenging operational issues, particularly with vulnerable and marginalized populations. So we do think that HPU is serving a very vulnerable group who are not currently connected to services and serving them with important resources. Does it prevent homelessness? We don't know yet, but we're going to try and find out. That's it. Thanks for bearing with me through the technical issues.
Yeah, no worries, Brian. It happens sometimes. I think we've all kind of understand how to take it in stride over past years, so no worries. So questions, I think. So Steve, we want to go ahead and read off some of the questions we may have in the chat over here?
Sure. Yes. So the first question is, how would the passage of SB 9 and SB 10 affect the likelihood of someone becoming affected by homelessness? That's the first question.
Yes. Can you remind me of those bills?
I cannot, but let me look.
Or can the
I think I know. Those are the ones that were opening up single-family housing in most residential areas to multifamily housing in California. I think governor just passed that on Friday.
Right. Yeah. I think there's a reasonable chance that it could have an effect. It's not really my policy area. I tend to be focused on the more technical aspects of prevention and the use of administrative data and the nuances of the homeless services systems in Los Angeles. I would say that building more affordable housing is it does have to be the solution to this crisis. I mean, I don't know the extent of the quantitative evidence that's out there about that, but yeah, I think since 2000, rents have been increasing in California by about 32%, while incomes have decreased by 5%. I wouldn't presume to be an expert on those bills and their effects, but yeah, I do think that loosening the kind of ideological grip of the kind of single family housing kind of dream on the Southern California kind of imaginary is something that has to be part of a solution to this.
Thanks. And the second question we have is from Chris, and he's asking, can you expand on the challenges with manual data lookup? Was it a data quality issue in the source or something else?
Yeah, certainly. So let me just talk a little bit again about the data sources that we're using. So we get data from this integrated data system from the CIO, right? So that exists for certain kind of reporting purposes, right? So its primary use case is to enable the CIO to report to the Board of Supervisors, right? So the Board of Supervisors might want to know, how many people on food stamps are homeless, right? So this kind of integrated data system enable that sort of reporting. But it's not exhaustive of the data elements that are in these internal systems. So it has been kind of a lengthy process. These are not particularly new systems. They're kind of medical record systems. They're not particularly user friendly. So it takes time for staff to go in and look at clients. So we'll find things like in the address field, someone has written the string homeless, or as part of a mental health clinician's kind of treatment plan, there's some note buried in there that someone lost their housing like earlier this year and they've become homeless. So I think down the line, things like natural language processing could play a significant role here. But there are major challenges in terms of data acquisition and data sharing. It's really the legal aspect of this that is most challenging. So you've got things like HIPAA, an understandable sensitivity on the part of agencies about sharing more of this sensitive data, particularly things like case notes. So we're working to try to move the needle on getting access to and acquiring some of this data that is going to be is going to be important for this kind of care coordination, and just kind of improving the way that this data is collected. Just advocating that you need to move a lot of this stuff out of free text case notes. We need to have better discrete data elements for reporting homelessness and housing status. Without that kind of information, it's just very hard to do that care coordination. But in the meantime, we have to do the best with what we have, and so as soon as HPU gets a risk list, there's a kind of a manual data lookup process that might take a week or two. It's not ideal, but you got to do what you can.
Great, thanks. And so we have another question from Wesley, and he's asking, do you coordinate your work with researchers in other parts of the US? And can you talk a little bit about who are they and how do you coordinate with them?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's actually a relatively small number of researchers who are working kind of full time on homelessness. You could almost kind of put them in a single room, although maybe you wouldn't want to do that these days with COVID. But we talk to them very regularly. It is a little bit challenging because the policy space in Los Angeles is so unique, right, compared with other parts of the country. So, so if you take New York, for instance, they actually have what's called a right to shelter enshrined into law. So the people who enter homeless shelters in New York are believed to be a pretty representative sample of the homeless population in New York. So I think they have reason to believe that their data on homelessness is potentially pretty good. Whereas in Los Angeles, we know that there is a very large unsheltered population who is just not captured in the data at all, right? So, so that makes the LA space somewhat unique and somewhat challenging. But having said that, there's potentially a lot of overlap there. There was a really interesting homeless prevention program in New York called Homebase from a few years ago. That was another example of some of the quantitative evidence that is out there. They also did a similar kind of targeting tool. They weren't using predictive analytics, but they used data-driven approaches to create a screening tool, and they're using that to target prevention services. And so we actually have a technical advisory board, which consists of 3 researchers from homelessness and machine learning. One of them is Beth Shin, who was actually one of the people behind the Homebase prevention program in New York, and she's given us some really fantastic feedback on HBU, and we also have Rediat Abebe, who is a researcher on machine learning ethics at UC Berkeley, who is also on the technical advisory board, and kind of advising us on kind of fairness and equity issues. So yeah, we do try to seek out as much feedback as we can, even though the LA policy space is so unique.
Thanks. So we have about 3 more minutes left and a lot of questions. So the next question is from Cervantes, and he's asking, how do you predict the social police power policy change toward the homelessness in LA County?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in order to predict something, you have to observe it. So it's important to recognize even though we receive a lot of data, it's somewhat limited, in terms of what is captured and what is represented. So, for example, for interactions with the criminal justice system, you're going to see arrests from the county sheriff that result in jail bookings in a county facility. So if police are just generally harassing the homeless population in a way that doesn't necessarily result in an arrest, unfortunately, that is something that we're not going to observe. Now we can try and make inferences about that, but it's not something that we can directly observe in the data. But I do think it is a fascinating question, and there may be other ways that we can tackle it, but it is not something that we can currently directly observe and predict right now.
All right, thanks. So I think we have time for a couple more questions, maybe. So there's a question from Chris. He's asking, how does the new state-level aggregated HMIS data warehouse offer a solution?
Someone is familiar with homeless services, it seems. Hello, Chris. Yeah, that's a great question. So for everyone else's benefit, HMIS refers to Homeless Management Information System. So it's a HUD-mandated specification for local jurisdictions to collect kind of homeless data on people experiencing homelessness. So up until now, this has been entirely at the local level. So LA will have its own HMIS, San Francisco will have its own HMIS, and there's no kind of integration between them. So the state has recently started embarking on this project to integrate all of these different systems at the state level, which I think is fantastic. I don't know a lot about it. I know that there are significant data quality issues with the LA HMIS, And I don't know if they're going to be rectified with the state level integrated data or if they're just going to be amplified. It's kind of hard to say, but I do think it is a really exciting development, and yeah, we're very, very keen to see where it goes.
Thank you, Brian.
I'm also happy to connect offline with anyone who wants to chat. Always happy to talk about this stuff.
Yeah, I think Chris would be happy to kind of dive in more with you about this. He's kind of a resident knowledge hog right there for it. So again, Brian, thank you for your presentation, and thank you, Stephen, for hosting it. Thank you to I hope you yourself done in the future as we kind of help prepare the city of LA for hiring better, right? Again, I'm going to try to take part of our survey. Please let us know how well this presentation was, what things were to be done better, and besides sometimes. Have a cool day. Part of Datacon LA. Have a great day.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brian. Have a good one.
You too.